Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. It's Access to Democracy, and we have the most awesome panel that we have probably ever put together in one show. So I am completely awed by them, and we'll introduce them and let them tell a little bit about themselves. We'll start with, to my left, Betsy Lufts.
Hi, Alan. Thank you for this opportunity today.
Well, thank you.
My name is Betsy Lufts, and I'm the Executive Director of the Science and Technology Authority. So we're trying to grow jobs here in Minnesota, and it's going to be an interesting journey.
And next we have my co-host, Rick King, who's been with us many times in many capacities, and we'll probably keep him around for a while.
Oh, good. I'm glad about that. Nothing like a day more of job security, Alan.
And everybody knows Rick not only for being responsible for this wonderful studio that we have and the partnership with the City of Eagan, but as the Chief Technology Officer for Thomson Reuters, as Chair of the High-Speed Broadband Commission, and on and on and on. And he's a good skier besides.
Oh, interesting.
Which we didn't get up on the graphics.
Good to be here, Alan.
Gail O'Kane, welcome.
Hi, Alan. Thanks for having me. My name is Gail O'Kane, and I work for Minnesota State Colleges and Universities as the System Director for Education Industry Partnerships. My main responsibilities are to support science and technology initiatives throughout the system, and I'm Minnesota State Colleges and Universities representative to the Science and Technology Authority Advisory Commission.
And one of the first questions that I have to ask is, how did Minnesota fall so far behind the rest of the country in high-speed broadband and science and technology, things that it used to be a leader in? Open to anybody that can tell me that.
Well, maybe I'll start. I'm honored to be a member of the Science and Technology Commission with Gail and working under the direction of Betsy and the authority. But you know, my view is that we've kind of gone to sleep on the infrastructure in the state, the underpinnings of it, and the results of falling asleep on it are that some of the bridges are decaying more than they should. The roadways have more potholes than ever. We don't use the railway system enough. The airports tend to be misused or underused for a lot of the traffic that we need to go through the airports. And the broadband infrastructure is inadequate. We could move many more things through that infrastructure than the physical good infrastructure if we had the right piece. And I think the science and technology jobs in our state are another symptom of that decaying infrastructure. I think it doesn't just decay by itself, but the competition, the other states, other countries are aggressively going after growing these jobs, making sure that schools in the elementary and even the middle school and high school have good science programs, and they're developing kids to go to college in these areas. And then the colleges and the universities here in the state need to keep pumping out good people and attract people from outside of the state. But we need to keep those people that graduate here working here. And to do that, we need capital, we need investment in entrepreneurial activities, we need a better climate for high-tech jobs. We need a better climate for jobs that involve science and
But
technology.
all we hear is that we're in a budget deficit, we can't afford this, we can't afford that. In my way of thinking, we can't not afford to be on the cutting edge. We can't not afford to not only educate the next generation that's on its way up, but to keep them here, as you say, to return research and development. I mean, we have per capita in this state more Fortune 500 companies than any other state, and yet they're going to move away. We saw Medtronic just 2 years ago relocate to Texas because Texas made them a very big offer in terms of tax breaks. They took an operation which is about 1,500 jobs, and they located it in Texas. That should be here.
The focus, and I agree with that, Alan, the focus of the authority is, you asked about what has happened in the state. The state has done wonderful at helping build infrastructure to get the business side of the house done, but they have not invested in the R&D side of the house. So how do you take these small high-tech entrepreneurs and help them grow the business side? Most of them are scientists and engineers. It can be very challenging for them to step into the business side. Also, their time to market for product, if it's software, it could be a quick time to market. If it's a medical device or if it's something for manufacturing, it can take a longer time to get to market. In that meantime, where do the funds come from? Do they get them from the federal government? Do they get them from friends and family? So Minnesota did not have that part of the infrastructure set up to help the high-tech entrepreneur grow. And that is one of the reasons that the authority was created, because we realized we need to turn ideas into jobs. And we need to commercialize technology, and then the end result is we need to export. So how do we create that continuum of service and an opportunity for the small high-tech entrepreneur to help make them successful?
And I would add that I think one of the reasons why we haven't been as aggressive as some other states in supporting that kind of entrepreneurial activity is just what you mentioned a few minutes ago, which is we have been very successful with regard to large companies and corporate headquarters. And I think that may have created a sense of complacency, like we're doing great. And if you look at the numbers, one of the key messages in the report is, in terms of large companies, we're doing quite well. Where we see the numbers not going in the right direction, or numbers that are actually quite low, is in the area of entrepreneurial activities. By a variety of measures, we're kind of 40th or even worse in the state in terms of our ability to help small companies grow. And so that's kind of been a big focus of the Science and Technology Authority, is how to support growth companies. And so these are companies that, you know, if you can imagine, any small company takes a lot of entrepreneurial talent. Even if you're starting a dry cleaning shop, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of business savvy. But for these small growth companies that are technology based, it takes an even wider range of skills and even more supports. And many states have put those supports in place or have strategies, broad strategies, to help that whole part of the economy. Minnesota is one of only a handful of states that hasn't had an explicit plan for helping to grow science and technology jobs.
That amazed me when I read the report and I saw that there hasn't been any strategy here. Now, I've had an ongoing political battle over the last 8 years with the former administration about the no new taxes philosophy, because I just felt that not putting money into the state and into the infrastructure and into science and technology, we were doing a great disservice to the state. I feel that way today. I think that everybody in the state should have, and not just the rural areas that don't have it now, everybody should have access to high-speed internet, to high definition. And Joni, if you have the opportunity, there is my dog watching the Puppy Bowl on Super Bowl day. He enjoys high-speed internet. Everybody should have that. Every dog should have that available to him.
Well, truly, I guess every dog has its day in that photo, right?
And he's actually had his day, but
you know, in the case, I think the interesting part about the budget, because people say, what you said earlier, you know, in this time of deficit, how can you afford it? And you answered by how could you not afford it and so forth. I think a lot of these things end up being some choices, because even if you don't believe that the budget should be raised, you still have an opportunity to decide there's $36 billion that are going to be spent by our state that are already raised by our state on a flat basis. So where do you want to allocate that? And one of the problems is every year we have these structural deficits that are created by not having enough revenue to sustain what we've already offered. Fine. Somehow we've got to step out and create some programs that fix the structural problem. And this is one of those programs where you spend some money and you seed the future with a lot more jobs. The report calls for somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 new jobs in science and technology, and those are wage earning jobs. You know, they're in the 70,000 range, generally speaking.
In a state where the average wage is about 37,000 or 38,000, you're talking about all these jobs in the 70,000s. I've had the same argument about wind power, that we're buying it outside the state, it's being manufactured outside the state, and if it was being done in the state where we could generate such tremendous wind power, we would, number one, bring down costs, number two, create another group of thousands of high-paying jobs.
One thing that's different about these jobs is that they're so high-paying. Another thing that's different is about the ripple effect they have in the economy. The typical job results in another 2 jobs out there in the economy as you add a new job. With high-tech jobs, it's closer to 3 to 4 new jobs for every new high-tech job you add. And if you can imagine, you have these scientists that are creating ideas. You need people who can manufacture those products. You need suppliers that can help in the supply chain. You need lawyers that can help figure out how to make the whole process work. There's just all kinds of spin-off activity that happens with any job, but with a high-tech job, the spin-off activity is even more. So you get 2 bangs for the buck. You get the high wage and the high spin-off.
And ultimately, that's not just hundreds of jobs, that's not just thousands of jobs, but with that equation, that's tens of thousands of jobs in a state that is suffering not as badly as some states with unemployment, but nonetheless, it shouldn't be in Minnesota. Now, Ohio can go and take a bond issue out to create really assets for science and technology. What would be stopping our legislature from doing that? Is the legislature aware of this? Are they cooperative? Is the governor aware of it? Is he cooperative?
It would require a change in the constitutional amendment. And that it has been said that that would be very, very challenging. It would be better to do that if we weren't under such an economic crisis right now, but there's enough that the legislators and the governors are trying to deal with in that realm that a bonding, changing the constitutional amendment to make bonding allowable would be a steep challenge.
So they could take money and put it in the budget and do it that way.
Well, and we have 2 funding. We're doing a dual path funding request. We have a general fund request to get started. And Gail and Rick worked on this report for 6 months, yeoman's work of hundreds of volunteer hours, but they said, we want a long-term investment. We want a long-term plan. How do you fund that long-term plan? So the other initiative we put forth is a TIF, Technology Increment Financing Program, where we have worked with Department of Revenue and Deeds Research Department and came up with a certain set of NAICS codes that were specific to science and technology industry. And it's based on wages. We set a base, and then as it grows, we take an increment of that growth. Now that has never been done here in Minnesota. So that we have a bill being heard in the House next week. So we have good bipartisan support, but it's going to be a challenge as we move closer to the end of session and how we're going to do this. The budget for the forecast will come out on Monday, and we're hoping that there is enough growth in the forecast that we can maybe get some money from the general fund to put in general fund and have a general appropriation. So we are on 2 paths, Alan, knowing that we want to get this funded. We want to grow jobs, we want to take ideas and commercialize them. And the benefit of doing all that, as Gail and Rick mentioned, is they're high-paying jobs. That's more taxes coming back into the coffer that can fund a lot of the initiatives that are being challenged right now.
And in fairness to Governor Pawlenty, he saw the need to appoint the commission and at least pushed for and got the funding for the commission to do its job. Well, the commission did its job, came up with this awesome report, of which I've just read the executive summary, but it cries out for the fact that Minnesota is falling behind, and we can't be. I mean, one of the things that speaks in there, do we want to be the next Indonesia? Do we want to be the next Burma? Or do we want to be the next leader of the United States? I think they talked about Mississippi and Minnesota. We don't want to be Mississippi. I have nothing against Mississippi. Actually, I have a lot of things against Mississippi, but we don't want to be Mississippi anyway.
Well, the interesting thing, I think, with those comparisons is they're all moving aggressively too. Pick a state, they're all doing something. And the states that have the longest thoughtful, consistent approach come administration and as they come and go. It's been a state like North Carolina who in the late 50s decided that what they called themselves at that time was backward, southern, segregated farm country. That's the way they referred to themselves. That's a quote from their own analysis, so I don't mean it to be derogatory. That's what they said. And they said, we need a future. We need to plot how we can combine our agricultural roots and bring high tech in here. They conceived of the idea of Research Triangle Park at that time. That idea is 60 years old, and they stuck with it since the late 50s all the way through now to where there's thousands of jobs in that state. There's a high-tech magnet. The name RTP, or Research Triangle Park, is recognized around the world.
And Triangle Park has 1,400 companies, large and small, that work in or around it. That's 1,400 companies with literally tens of thousands of jobs.
That's
yes.
right. And all the things that did for that state, which frankly, they've got a couple of great assets in the state. They've got mountains, nice mountains, and they've got a great ocean. Other than that, we have more assets to work with than that state. So why cannot we put together a plan like this plan and stick with it and go for it and become a science and technology hub among the states?
Because it requires visionaries, and we really need the visionaries in public office or in the private sector to lead us in that regard and to show people how important this is, not for us, not for this generation, but for the generations coming up down the road.
And I think that something that some people may say is, well, we've already made investments. There's been investments in the research at the University of Minnesota through their biomedical facilities program, a few $100 million that's been dedicated to that over 10 years for growing, for creating the kind of facilities that are going to draw top flight research talent. The UMayo partnership has been an important investment. The Bio-Business Alliance has been an investment by the state. And what we've kind of done is mapped out the existing investments and said, you know what, it's important. All these investments are helping to create the ideas that can lead to jobs. Where we see the big gap is in the commercialization phase, where the state of Minnesota, unlike other states, hasn't been as aggressive in supporting the process of moving research into the private sector. Last year, there was bipartisan support, though, for the angel investment tax credit, and Betsy can talk about how effective that's been. That kind of started to get at that pathway, but there are many stages along the way, and I think the findings of the commission were that we have to make sure we fund the whole ecosystem. If you fund a piece of it, but don't ever fund the piece that it's going to turn ideas into jobs, then you're really not going to reap the benefits fully of your investment. So I don't know, maybe Betsy can talk about the angel investment tax credit and how effective that's been in the short time it's been in existence.
There was just an article this morning, $28 million was invested as a result of the angel investment tax credit. So the VC, venture capitalists, have moved further back on the continuum of technology growth. The angels are coming before them, but as Gail said, how do we get a company if they need to have angel or venture, how do we get them to that place? How do we educate them? Those technologists are so focused on growing their technology. There's so much that they have with regulatory issues that they have, IP issues that they have, all these things that happen while they're trying to grow the technology. How do we help them do that? How can we hold their hand and help them complete the business side of their house to prepare them to be ready for angel investment or VC investment if they need it? So we are the beginning of the continuum. The state would serve as seed capital. Invest in companies and seed capital, and everything that we're proposing would be matched by the companies. We're not going to just give them a check.
That's very important to emphasize.
Yes.
Because the companies are private companies.
Right.
We're not talking about public companies, but we're talking about a partnership. City of Eagan and Thomson Reuters in this facility, a unique partnership that benefits both sides. They both saved a lot of money by this venture. Corporations, in the long run, it's to their benefit to save a lot of money by pairing up or partnering with the state. And the other side of the coin is, you mentioned tax credits. The legislature has to recognize that tax credits aren't giving money away. Tax credits are really building for the future. One of the things that grieves me in this state is the film board lost most of its opportunity to give credits. Well, what happens? Gran Torino is about Minnesota, and it's filmed in Michigan. And on. I can name a half a dozen movies that are about this state that are being filmed outside the state because they don't get the tax credits here. But if a movie comes in here, you have maybe 2 or 3 months, you have the personnel, you have restaurants, you have hotels, you have everything else. It comes back, and the people that are employed are from here, the same as in this situation. This would be directly beneficial to the state, and yet it seems that it's a very hard point to get with some of these legislators.
I think it's important to note too, just because it may be confusing to some people listening, that there's a gap where from developing an idea to getting it commercialized, and the money Betsy's talking about, the company would put in their share, the state would help bridge it, but once they reach fruition, the state's going to get its money back. The state will get its money back. So the idea of the state funding is to bridge the gap of that. They call it the valley of death, when a lot of the entrepreneurs can't go from an idea into commercialization of that idea. So if you look at it as almost they have to match it, but it comes with a comeback, and you can use that money again. So it's not as if the state becomes a long-term financial partner of these institutions or venture capitalists. It simply
I think
is
that's a
covering some
very
place.
important point. And maybe on a federal level, the bailout of General Motors could be an example. The company was about to go under. With much opposition, the federal government bailed them out. But what happened? This week, they have announced the first profit that they have had in a number of years. They've paid back the bulk of the money that the federal government gave them, and we, the federal government, the people, still own 21% of the company. So that's a perfect example of what you're indicating, and people have to understand that these are not giveaways. These are something that really benefits all of us.
Well, and we've done a lot of research on the return on investment, and we are a few people that have been involved in this, but how many people are on the advisory commission? There are 18 people on the advisory commission, ranging from the vice president of research at the University of Minnesota, director of genomics at Mayo Clinic, but a number of industry people as well from both small and large companies. And these people speak the language of business, and they talk about return on investment. And we did research on how these programs pay themselves back in other states. And the numbers are quite impressive, anywhere from 10 to 1 in terms of for every $1 of public investment, there's $10 in private investment that comes back. In Texas, they're counting $18 coming back for every $1 in investment. So I don't think the people on this commission would be promoting this idea unless it really met the same kind of benchmarks that they have in their own business, which is that there's going to be a return on investment. So these are proven strategies. The types of initiatives we're proposing are things that have been done in other states. The one I'm most familiar with, because I'm particularly interested in workforce issues, is the proposal to develop an internship program by which companies will be subsidized 50% for the wages they pay for interns. Now, our students, both at the University of Minnesota, our system, and in private colleges, get a great education in the technical side of science and technology. What we hear from business, though, is when they get into the workforce, they don't understand the business framework, how to work in a regulated environment, the terminology of business, intellectual property, and things like that. And what companies really want is they want experienced people to work for them. Well, our students want that experience, but frankly, not a lot of companies can't afford to give it to them through internships. So what Ohio has done is it's provided a subsidy of up to $3,000 for each student that gets employed by a company. And this has been a wildly successful program in Ohio. Even in the depths of the recession, they were oversubscribed with companies that wanted to hire interns, whereas now we have a very hard time placing interns in industry at all. So that's kind of a win-win-win. It's a win for students, it's a win for business, and then it's a win for the state too, because we're more likely to keep those students. If they come and work as an intern at Thomson Reuters, they're more likely to stay in Minnesota and work for Thomson Reuters after we invest so much in educating them. Keep them here, rather than sending them to another state. We want to give them a reason to be here, because we need our talented people. So that's an example of a program that we looked at. We saw the ROI, we saw that it's been working, we saw that even under the worst times in the recession it still works. So I think if you look at every element of our proposal, all of them are grounded in research and research of what works.
How do we get people involved in recognizing this? I think that's the hardest part. People see a story in the newspaper about a murder in St. Paul, or 2 people were killed, and it gets big play. A report comes out on science and technology, and it gets passed over. And where do we start, and how do we get the people to recognize that what the commission, and the commission certainly had a broad brush. It had people from all aspects of the community and the professional side of it to come up with this in a nonpartisan way. What do we do to instill that in people? Where do we start with that? Where do we get you the publicity that you deserve and that people should recognize?
You know, Alan, I think one of the best ways to do that is, how did we learn things as children? Once upon a time, we tell stories. We tell, you tell things that have happened. So yesterday there was an announcement at the Capitol. BioVest from Florida, it has had a facility in Coon Rapids, and they're going to do their manufacturing of a cancer vaccine for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So anyone who has a relative with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma immediately says, oh my gosh, we need to get that. They have to have a connection to whatever the technology is. They have to, I think some people just take it for granted that that someone makes the product and it's always going to be there to help them. And they don't know they need it till they need it, or they don't see the value in it until they know someone that has received benefit from something that they're doing. And we are a great mecca for medical device. We have some great aerospace and defense initiatives here. We have some renewable energy that we're growing in the renewable energy sector, the algae research, the biomass, the biodiesel fuel. And until it becomes everyday life experience, then I don't think people will pick up on it as much, because it's not a big rah-rah. It's just not something people celebrate. But I'll tell you, the day that I got I received notice that my cousin's husband was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's. And the very next day, I got this invitation to go to the Capitol, which was yesterday. And I said, oh my gosh, talk about synchronicity. Because now I have this information that I can send to my cousin and say, when he is done with his treatment, he can go on this maintenance treatment, because it'll be ready by then. Well, how do people make that personal connection? The broadband. the broadband, that's a huge initiative. How many of us have smartphones now and or computers of some sort in our house? And it's interesting to me to think, wow, there's still people out there that don't have it because of the cost, the expense, or the opportunity to get a good signal. So how can we create this environment and people feel a connection to the outcomes?
And you're speaking of connections. By 2015, we had pledged to have this entire state have high-speed internet available
Yes, we
to
did.
it.
That is the target in law.
And do you think that we're going to make it?
Well, according to a report that just came out 2 days ago, I think, we were looking not too bad. I mean, the Minnesota average now is about 95% at 3 megabits or more. It's not quite the speed we want, but we're closing the gap slowly. We still have about 10 counties in the state, mostly in the southwest, also in the southeast, and then the northeast that are below that average, and they tend to be the places that are more sparsely populated. But we've got to get that done, and we've made progress over the last year. Hopefully, we've got 4 years to go before we meet the goal.
If not by cable, what about by wireless?
Well, wireless is increased. 4G signal today that will soon be rolling out in the new smartphones will actually permit 10 megabits service. So you'll be able to have wireless capability. That kind of cellular coverage will actually give a person that kind of speed to get onto the internet at high speeds. So that's good. But when you say, how do you create awareness? I think Betsy's example of the stories is really the most beneficial way. When you're talking about the masses, what we would all advocate, the commission, what we would advocate and hope for is that, the governor, as the one with the best pulpit to use, would put this into his own program and see that while we talk about increasing jobs, which is a major piece of his platform, that this could be a job creator as well. Then people get an awareness of why that's true, where we are, where we actually want to be, and that's why the Broadband Task Force set goals, because my theory was you don't get to where you don't set a goal. You can't get there. You don't know where you're going. If you don't measure it, you have no idea. And we can do that with the materials. If you look through the report, Gail mentioned 40th state in terms of entrepreneurial development. Some metrics were up in number 6, maybe even in the top 10. Some were in the middle of the pack. Some were way below. And I think these are things that we need to look at and decide